میں وہ غلام، پھر یہ کہنا کہ تڑپتا ہے وطن میں وہ غلام، کچھ نہیں لانا فقط اذن زیارت لانا، یہ عریضہ میرے مولا کو سنا کرانا، جانے والوں در عباس پہ جب تم جانا، یہ عریضہ میرے مولا کو سنا کرانا، کہنا ہاشم کے کمر سے یہ کرے اور کرم، دیکھنے ہیں مجھے روزوں کے بدلتے پرچم، دیکھنے ہیں مجھے روزوں کے بدلتے پرچم، اس برس ماہ ازاں مجھ کو وہی دکھلانا، یہ عریضہ میرے مولا کو سنا کرانا، جانے والوں در عباس پہ جب تم جانا، یہ عریضہ میرے مولا کو سنا کرانا، کہ نہ حضرت سے وسائل کو کشادہ کر دے، میرا اس سال ذرا رزق زیادہ کر دے، میرا اس سال ذرا رزق زیادہ کر دے، بیٹیوں بیتوں کو ہمراہ مجھے ہے لانا، یہ عریضہ میرے مولا کو سنا کرانا، جانے والوں در عباس پہ جب تم جانا، یہ عریضہ میرے مولا کو سنا کرانا، صلوات۔
Beautiful recitation. Thank you, Abbas. All right, Brother Faris, come on up. We can do one source.
پر محمد والے محمد صلوات۔ عجیب حال میں ہے فاطمہ کے دونوں پہ سر، عجیب حال میں ہے فاطمہ کے دونوں پہ سر، حسن کے تیر بدن میں حسین تیروں پر، عجیب حال میں ہے فاطمہ کے دونوں پہ سر، حسن کو دیکھا ہے قاسم نے خون گلتے ہوئے، حسن کو دیکھا ہے قاسم نے خون گلتے ہوئے، سکینہ دیکھتی ہے باپ کو تخے خنجر، عجیب حال میں ہے فاطمہ کے دونوں پہ سر، نہ جانے دیکھے ہے زینب نے تشت میں کیسے، نہ جانے دیکھے ہیں زینب نے تشت میں کیسے، جگر کے ٹکڑے حسن کے، جگر کے ٹکڑے حسن کے، کبھی حسین کا سر، عجیب حال میں ہے فاطمہ کے دونوں پہ سر، حسن نے جاتے ہوئے چومے بازو زینب کے حسن نے جاتے ہوئے چومے بازو زینب کے حسین جاتے ہوئے چومتے رہے چادر عجیب حال میں ہے فاطمہ کے دونوں پہ سر ادھر حسن کے جنازے پر پھول تیروں کے ادھر حسن کے جنازے پر پھول تیروں کے ادھر حسین کے لاشیں ادھر حسین کے لاشیں کی نظر ہے پتھر عجیب حال میں ہے فاطمہ کے دونوں پہ سر صلوات
Thank you, Brother Faris. Beautiful recitation. Before we begin, I'd like to do Surah Fatiha for the Marumeen for the sponsors of tonight's Majlis. Also, one update: we have a meet and greet with Dr. Shabbir Kirmani Friday, July 4th, 2:30 p.m. It's going to be after Jummah Salah, so I encourage everybody here to come, bring some questions. It's a good way to interact with the community, good way to get some knowledge. While we have him here. So, loud salat. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. With that, I'd like to welcome Dr. Shabbir Kirmani to the minbar.
فاتحة بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم فوض أمري إلى الله إن الله بصير بالعباد ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ونعم المولى ونعم النصير والصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على الرسول المسدد المصطفى الأمجد المحمود الأحمد الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا وقل رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتاب الكريم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وما من دابة في الأرض إلا على الله رزقها صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوا على محمد وآل محمد My respected elders, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman here in Boston or across the globe, wherever you may be hearing my voice, Salamun alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Question: what is the relationship between Islam and economics? When it comes to Islam, typically when we've grown up and we listen to majalises and we listen to lectures, oftentimes, or whether you've gone to school for Islamic studies or you've even been taught, one of the terms that I at least grew up hearing, and one of the phrases that I grew up hearing was that Islam is a complete way of life. Have you heard this? Right. The notion was that deen, even if the way you translate it, it's complex. Sometimes we say deen, Maliki Yawmiddin, for example. Deen means religion. Well, not really, not quite. Close, but no cigar. And the idea being that it doesn't always work in context. For example, Allah says, Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim, right? Maliki Yawmiddin in Surah Fatiha, right? Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahman Rahim, Maliki Yawmiddin. Master of the day of religion? Does that make sense? It doesn't. And that's why translators don't write master of the day of religion. They say master of the day of judgment or similar. And you find that deen is something that is broader, vaster. But typically, if something is claiming in the world that I and you live in, and we talked about knowledge last night, that when we live in this world that we live in, if something's going to be called not a religion but a complete comprehensive way of life, which it is, it should tell me about those other aspects of life. It should tell me about certain things. And one of the things that it should tell me about is what I should do for my career, what I should do for my livelihood, what I should do for my income. Otherwise, how can it be a complete comprehensive way of life? But I never heard anything about that growing up from the minbar. But you may find that if you delve into the books of Islam, you may find that there is a very rich tradition of insights on this topic and many other topics. Tonight, we're gonna build on our conversation of the future of our community, but we're taking a different tone in a different way. We're getting more serious now. We're upping the ante, as they say. We're going higher up the bar. And we're going to a situation where the conversations are gonna get more dense. But that's important. Why? Because, as I alluded to the other night, the conversations that we've historically heard, sometimes they were simplistic, sometimes they were limited. They were necessary, but not sufficient for the intellect of the populace that's there. Just look at the populace I've met here, where people are in different fields of life, in physics and biotech, and met people from all over Boston who are doing amazing things. And the reality of the matter is, there is so much to discuss, but often it's not discussed. If you want people to feel in the future of our community that they want to come to a masjid, they want to come to an imam bargah, well, one thing that we have to aspire to is what I've been discussing in the past few nights, which is kamal, excellence, ahsan, another form of excellence. That is, we are naturally attracted to something that is excellent, as in architecture, in life, in success. And so now, when it comes to this, there's a rich tradition of topics that could be discussed and need to be discussed with our different populace of our community, which may have been neglected for a long time. And that includes Islam in economics, Islam in art, Islam in poetry, Islam in sociology, Islam in medicine, Islam in, you can go down the line. There's no shortage of topics to be discussed. But it requires some effort. So now, tonight's conversation builds on the future of our community to discuss one of those topics and also highlight what is this Islam's economic thought process? How does that compare to other religions, ideologies, and concepts and theories? And how does that relate to you and I in the modern world? And what is it that the Ahlul Bayt have told us? What is it the Quran has told us? What is it said about economic development as well as our pursuit of our life? Because many people are asking, and very validly, what should I do with my life? Especially now in an era of AI where access to knowledge may be easier than any other time in history. That what should I do? And now the possibilities may be infinite. Those careers that one may have in 5, 10, 15, 20 years, they may not exist right now. And the reality is we're moving into a different world. But there are some guidelines that Islam can teach us on. So now, tonight, inshallah, I want to share the richness of this topic, the Islamic concept of it, and how it may help us live not better lives only here, but in the next world and for our broader society here, inshallah. This is our agenda, inshallah, tonight. First principle on this is number one. And I've been harping on this, and I'll share with you why this topic is so important. Number one. There was a French philosopher by the name of Montesquieu. Montesquieu said that a man has three teachers in life. Let's start here. He says the first teacher in life is the parents. Parents, the cradle of the parents, the hands of the parents, the mother, the father. That first institution is the first institution of education in the life of a human being. But as they slowly get older, they meet their second teacher. And the second teacher is the schoolmaster, or the teacher, or college, or university, or the system they're in. The schoolmaster, school, second teacher. And the third teacher in life, he says, the final teacher of life, is life itself. And Montesquieu says something interesting. He says when man finds out and interacts with life, the third teacher, he realizes what the third teacher teaches a man in life contradicts what the other first two teachers said. What the parents said and what the schoolmaster said. Life says the opposite. Why? One of the reasons being because life versus the teachers and the parents and the teachers tell you life as it should be. Whereas life tells you as it is. Parents, teachers say, you should be nice, you should be compassionate, you should be loving, you should be caring, you should be honest, you should be truthful, you should be X, Y, and Z. But life says it's not always like that. People are not always honest. People are not always truthful. People are not always trustworthy. Similarly, in our Imam Bargahs, our Husainiyas, our masajids across the world, you'll find we sometimes tell people how things should be, but in practical implementation, it doesn't pan out. What do I mean? You can ask a whole generation of people who went through this, which was, we'll say to our kids, beta, be religious, come to Imam Bara, practice your faith, come to Jummah, come Thursday night, come to the Imam Bara, do matam, do this, do all that. Fantastic. Fantastic. And so that young man or young sister, or they grow up and they're going through the whole routine. They're like, this is important, this is a priority. What people are saying is religion's a priority. I need to take time, I need to be there, I need to be participating, I need to be part of this. This is important. And then some things happen which help young perceptive people see things in some way. An example. That same person who heard from their community, their family, their loved ones, religion, practice, all that's important. Now that same person becomes 18, 19, 20, 21, 22. They got they went to school, they got, their degree, and now they want to get married. And they get in line to get married, having practiced and been religious and done all the things that the community said and society said one should do. And lo and behold, somebody who may have never been to the mosque, who may have never gone, they have maybe a little fancier car, maybe a little fancier bank balance, they cut everyone in line. And they get married very quick. And at that junction, that person stops and thinks to themselves, hold on a second, I did everything right. I did everything that I was told to do. I did everything society told us what to do. But, excuse my French, society was be me. Society was not being truthful. Society was not being honest. Society was saying one thing, doing another. By the way, I remind you, it's not kids' majlis. In fact, the reality being that this is something that's important for us to consider. I usually, in fact, I give a waiver in my lectures, parental discretion advised. And I'm serious when I say it. Because the themes and the concepts are going to be difficult. Some people get upset at me. One time I was telling someone to pursue what you're excellent at. And this guy was a generational doctor, and his parents got very upset. And the reality of the matter is, if you're not seeking the truth, this is not the place to be. My majlis is definitely not the place to be. I will shake and rattle your core. And I have more fear, not that people understand me or don't understand. I'm more afraid if people actually understand what I'm saying. That would be a bigger problem for me. And the reality is because, and I'll try to harp on this, is because I have too much love for you. I have too much love for this community. And I want to share this very honestly. For you and I to call ourselves followers of the Ahlul Bayt in 2025 has not been easy. You know how much blood has been spilt? I have uncles who were target killed in Pakistan, my mom's brothers. Why? Because they were part of the intelligentsia of Pakistan. Why? Because they had love for Imam Ali. Why? Because they wanted to do something for their community, their society. If you have Jafari or Zaidi or Abidi or fill in the blank Sayyid name in your line, how did you end up in the subcontinent? Do you know the history? There was bitter persecution that took place that drove you or your ancestors away from the Arab belt, that drove them to Persia, that drove them to the subcontinent to survive. And you know, when they left, they didn't leave with gold and silver. They left with two things. They left with their books of the Ahlul Bayt in their hands and their iman in their heart. And that's a big price to pay, to be uprooted. That we sometimes take these things for granted. You know about granted? I'll tell you. Have you heard the saying in America, shirt sleeve to shirt sleeve in 3 generations? Okay, I'll give you modern terminology. This happened in the early, you guys should know this, you're from Boston, but nonetheless, nobody reads history. And what happened was generations would come, the first generation would come and they would build a business and they would toil. And the second generation would come and they saw the struggles of their parents. So they built the business up bigger. But the third generation didn't see any of that. And they ran the business into the ground. As the saying goes, the first generation builds it, the second generation grows it, and the third generation blows it. In fact, in Japan, they don't look for someone in the family to run the company afterwards. They actually look for outsider because they know how clear it is. So not knowing the difficulties, sometimes we take things for granted and we'll say, I'll miss a majlis, I'll miss a majlis here. Naame Ali tha, khatra jahan, जान के लिए नामे अली था खतरा जहां जान के लिए नामे अली था खतरा जहां जान के लिए हमने अली के नाम वही जान के लिए नामे अली था. Wherever the name of Ali ibn Abi Talib was a threat, we took that name right there and then. Because the love of Imam Ali alayhi salam was more valuable than anything to us. It gave us our identity. It gave us our sense of being honest. It gave us our sense of being compassionate, of being true. So now, the dichotomy is there. But you may find that Islam actually tells us some magnificent things that if we think about it, will make us do excellent in this world. So now, there is theory and there's reality. There's theory and there's practice. There's theory and the reality. So now, sometimes in our communities, we harp on the theory, but the practice elements are missed out. So now, Islam talks about amazing things. One of them is economics, and I want to share this. If you read the Bible, and it's important to read the Bible, for example, and understand certain principles therein that can highlight things, perspective. I'm not saying to listen to it. And one of the brothers asked a great question, what Bible to read? When I talk to some of my revert friends, they say the closest Bible that we have that's accessible is the red letter Bible, where they highlight what Jesus said in red, and then the other ones are not in red. But the oldest form of the Bible that we have today is called the Codex Sinaiticus. Were found in Sinai. And that doesn't have any concept of Jesus as God. As you know, if you read the books by Karen Armstrong, in one of her books called The Bible, A History, this came much later. The concept of the Trinity, Constantinople, Constantine, and the Council of Nicaea, if you know history and things like that. Now, when will Islam get back to that era that we were talking about last night, where there was science, mathematics development? Karen Armstrong, the same author that I've met and I've talked about the other night, she gets asked this question all the time. You know what she says? They ask her, as an outsider, when will Islam go back to the golden era, the golden age, the golden time where it was contributing to the world in art, sciences, poetry, you name it? And she said a line which I want you to never forget. She said, it will not happen until, and I quote, it will not happen until you send your best minds to mullah school. What? Yeah. When I talked about last night Tusi, when I talked about Avicenna, when I talked about scholars, those were the best minds going into those areas. That's why Ibn Sina, that's why Tusi, Khwaja Nasiruddin Tusi, that's why they did what they did. So I went to India a couple of years ago, and so I went to every major cities, not every major city. I went to Bombay a couple of times. I went to Bhavnagar in Gujarat. I went to Lucknow. I went to Hyderabad. I went to Bangalore. So I got a flavor of most of India's, the big cities at some level. And I asked people, you know, this, and if you ask our scholarship, you'll find that the subcontinent, most of the people who hail from that background, used to produce big scholars back in the day. If you go to the graveyards in Najaf, for example, in Qum, every third or fourth marja had a Hindavi in their last name or something like that. Some were from Kashmir, some were from Lucknow, some people were from all over. But you don't really find that as much anymore. And so I asked people why. I asked them in the north, I asked them in the south, I asked them in the east, and I asked them in the west. And they said, some of the elders said a proverb. And they said, it became like lawyers, like law. Law necessitates integrity in the judicial system. If there's not integrity in the judicial system, then the prestige of a lawyer can be compromised, or the profession at a societal level. And so the muhavara was for lawyers in the subcontinent, Pare Farsi beche tel. You studied something complex, you studied something that was, sophisticated, but you end up selling oil. You're a snake oil salesman, in our terms. And so what they told me was that if you could become in the 20th century, in the later part of the 20th century, if you could become a doctor, you became a doctor. If you could become an engineer, you became an engineer. If you could become an entrepreneur, you became an entrepreneur. If you could do nothing else, they said, this not me, you became a Maulana. And there's an old saying that you reap what you sow. I'll tell you a story of President. So I've always been in management committees, and I don't call myself a Maulana. I get offended by it, to be honest with you, because of our societal recognition of a Maulana, right? We have pseudo-respect for Maulanas. You know what pseudo-respect is? Like a pseudonym, pseudo-fake, meaning, mashallah, Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad. And you're like, I would never hang out with you. I'd never really be like that person. Because we know it's a difficult life. Not because they're bad people, because we've created systems that are problematic, that have conflicts of interest, that cause us to become dilapidated. The president told me a question. He said, like, Doc, you keep it real, so I'll keep it real with you. I want to tell you a joke. I want to tell you something. There's a lesson there. Eh? He said a Maulana was by a river and he was swimming. He was trying to swim and he started drowning. Why the Maulana is drowning, I don't know. He should know how to swim. It's sunnat. The Prophet used to know how to swim. And it's highly recommended. You should know how to horse ride, swim, and you should know how to do archery. But in this story, he is drowning. And so everyone comes and says, Maulana, hath dije, taki we'll get you out. We'll save you. And so the Maulana is not giving his hand. And everyone's like, what are you doing? You're going to drown. You're going to die. Until the president of the community comes. He says, I got this, don't worry, you guys are rookies. And so he gets to the front and he pulls out his wallet. He pulls out a crisp $100 bill, folds it, puts it in his hand, and he said, Maulana, Bismillah. And the Maulana stretches his hand out, and then he grabs him and he brings him out. And everyone's like, what did you do? How'd you do that? He said, my dear friends, remember, Maulvi kabhi dete nahi hai, lete hain. And that's the concept that we have. That's the mindset that we have. Remember one thing. This will tell you the history of religion and power and economics. जिसको भी शेख व शाह ने हुक्म खुदा दिया करार, जॉन, जिसको भी शेख व शाह ने हुक्म खुदा दिया करार, हमने नहीं किया वो काम, हां बखुदा नहीं किया। और निस्बते इल्म है बहुत हाकिम वक्त को अजीज, निस्बते इल्म है बहुत हाकिम वक्त, हर वक्त निस्बते इल्म है बहुत हाकिम वक्त को अजीज, उसने तो कारे जहल भी बे उलमा नहीं किया। Whether you look at the Christian church, whether you look at the history of Judaism, whether you look at the history of Islam, you'll find that we have created these false dilemmas, these false dichotomies, and we have created conflicts of interest, where the Maulanas, who are supposed to be our societal truth speakers, can't speak the truth. Why? Because sometimes we haven't given them the amnesty to be able to speak the truth. And that's a problem, because we suffer. Because we're not told what we need to be told. We're not told how to uplift ourselves, better of ourselves, when it's in our interest. I'll give you an example. If my primary source of income is these majalis, and you invite me to speak, do I have an incentive to want to come back or not? I have a pretty strong incentive to want to come back. So am I going to say something that may tick you off, that may upset you? I'm going to be hesitant, I'm going to be reluctant. Even if it's in your betterment, I'm not going to say it. By the way, this happened in the history of universities, and this happened in the history of churches. The first churches were the endowers of universities. Of course, before that, it was, for example, the oldest, longest running continuous university, according to historians, is supposed to be the Qarawiyun in Fez, Morocco. Some say then the Hawza Najaf. And then after that, of course, you have Oxford and Cambridge, right? The Hawza Najaf did move for a time to Hilla, but still the essence was, even though it was geographically not Najaf, but the principle, it was the same university. Anyways, so when the churches in Europe said, we now want you people who are teaching, professors, to do research, professors weren't all dull. They were actually quite smart and bright. And they still are, but they do selective. They also know how to survive. Today, if you listen to NPR on the Middle East crisis, most professors are self-censoring. They know what to say, but they're just not saying it because environment doesn't allow it. Why? So the same thing happened in the history of Europe. You know what happened? They said, look, okay, church, you want us to do research? Fine. But what if our research conflicts with your worldview? So for example, we do research and we find, for example, there's not a geocentric model of the universe, there's a heliocentric model of the universe. So it's not that the earth is not the center of the universe, but rather the sun is the center. Whereas the Bible, that form of the Bible that they had at the time, was suggesting that earth is the center.